I think direct mail is still the best pillar channel to build a program around because it's the easiest one to add on these additional layers to. You can do digital co-targeting or display co-targeting. You can either get or append sell information to add an SMS component. So direct mail, besides all the other reasons why it's kind of endured as a workhorse of the industry, is a really good pillar to kind of build on these channels of communication.
Welcome, everyone. I am so excited to be here today with Dan Saunders. Dan, welcome to What the Fundraising.
Mallory, it is an honor to be here. I really enjoy your work and appreciate your thought leadership. So it's a real thrill to be on the show. Thank you for having me.
Well, I am really excited to dig in with you around a few things, but why don't we start with you telling everyone a little bit about you and your pathway that brings you to this conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for asking. Well, like many of your listeners, my pathway into the nonprofit sector was not planned or direct. I was born and raised in northern New Jersey, went to school at Montclair State University, got a degree in broadcast communications, decided at one point that I wanted to go into the wedding video business. I had a background in video production. My dad was a wedding photographer, seemed like a logical thing to do. Great business. Weddings are a lot of fun. Wasn't firing the creative synapses for me. I decided I wanted to do something else with my life and get into marketing. I had one marketing free elective class in college, old school marketing guy. His name was Professor Schwartz. I have no idea if he's still around today, but he had a big impact on my life because that class really opened my eyes to the process of marketing and how much I enjoyed using data and creative to try to find the right message for the right audience. And it stuck in my mind. So I decided that I wanted to get an entry-level marketing position, applied for lots of different jobs, found one on Craigslist. Younger listeners, we could do another episode on what Craigslist used to be like. Used to be a very good place to go and find very good jobs, actually. And I found a very curiously but well-written post for an entry-level marketing position at Conrad Direct, where I still work today. I was fortunate to get the job. Been there for 17 years, my entirety in the industry, and really just kind of immediately just connected a lot of dots for me about using data to help nonprofits raise money more efficiently and increase their impact and create a better donor experience. It really just kind of crossed a lot of interest for me. And I've been fortunate to grow in the industry over time. Now I'm vice president, part of our executive management team at Conrad. In recent years have really focused a lot, besides on my own career, in thought leadership. A lot of that's been through my activity with DMAW, the Direct Marketing Association of Washington, where I'm president this year, and as well as a lot of blogging on LinkedIn and my podcast, Dynamic Nonprofits, which is dedicated to advocating for an unsiloed approach to fundraising. So I've been really grateful to enter a lot of conversations over the last few years. And one of those is about the importance of not just multi-channel strategy, but multi-channel education for fundraisers, which I'm really excited to dig into today.
Okay. Wow. I don't think I realized that you had spent your entirety in your career at the same location, which I actually think is so cool because particularly when we're talking about data and strategy and this sort of like multi-channel approach, because I think a lot of times because folks bounce around this industry so much, things are so different at so many different places. It can be hard to sort of like take with you or iterate on strategies because you're learning a whole new kind of ball game around what the organization has done. And so I'm guessing that your sort of longevity there, though I'm sure you worked on a huge diversity of projects and things like that, has created some really unique insight into what works, what doesn't work, what are the things we don't really like understand, or maybe have some myths around that are holding us back from really being able to kind of leverage things as best we can. So for folks who are listening to this who have no idea what multi-channel marketing is, can you just give us a like quick sort of definition and explanation of that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the practice of multi-channel marketing itself is what it sounds like, where you're using multiple channels to engage the same audience. Omni-channel marketing has become more favored as a phrase, where you're using multiple channels, but doing so in a cohesive way where you're reinforcing the same messages and you're trying to drive the consumer or donor in this case towards a shared goal. And that's really become a huge part of growing generosity and improving fundraising practices is channels not competing with each other for budget, but working with each other, collaborating towards a shared goal. And my belief is that a rising tide does lift all ships. And if we can improve the donor experience and enhance generosity and increase mission impact, that it's going to lift up everyone in the sector altogether.
Okay, so I love what you just said because you are immediately taking us out of this binary way that we're often thinking about these things, right? We either do this thing or we do this thing. We either spend money on, we either do direct mail or we do social media. And so I love what you're saying around sort of like, how do we leverage channels in ways that are really like synergistic and mutually beneficial? Can you break down, this is getting like maybe a little tactical right out of the gate, but like, can you break down for us an example of one type of sort of communication strategy and how you would break out some of the prompts or some of the like motivational elements across different channels to lead to that cohesive experience?
Oh, absolutely. And as a day job being a list broker, I'm very aware, very sensitive to that either or conversation. And that
Mm,
impacted a lot of my growth in the industry is seeing digital and direct
mm,
mail fundraisers kind of taking shots at each other and battling for budget and kind of pitch things as an either or proposition. And I was very, very fortunate in that my time coming up in the business, I had an opportunity to work on both sides and go to conferences that specialized in each area. And I see, even though a lot of the content was unique and the speakers were unique, and most of the attendees at that point were fairly unique, that there were principles that could easily apply to the other one. So that was really informative early in my career. And I'm very grateful that I have that perspective. I can give you one example that was kind of one of the things that was kind of my aha moment and opened my eyes. And that was when a client went back and they did an analysis on their file. And at this point, 99% of their donors came from direct mail, but they did ask for email addresses on the direct mail reply. And at this point, most of their email program consisted of a weekly newsletter. There wasn't a very sophisticated online development program per se. And they found that just having an email address made the direct mail donor more valuable, even though most of those people were not giving gifts online. It was the
mm,
donor raising their hand and saying, I want to engage with your organization through multiple channels, that was a very valuable behavior. And even though the donor wasn't getting a whole lot via email at that point, just them supplying that additional information made them a more valuable donor to the organization. And that really kind of opened my eyes
mm,
because this was happening organically. And it started getting me to think about, well, what if we had a more focused strategy for direct mail donors who are providing their email addresses? And these days, I'm talking to people about things like faster gratitude. One of the great things about having email address is that you can get a thank you out much quicker than you can with a thank you package in the mail. You can do customized welcome series for people based on what they're responding to in the mail. So what's so exciting about that, and
mm,
Next After has done a lot of amazing research showing the value of offline donors who do have an email address, is that so much of it is just organic right now. And if we had strategies that played to the specific strengths of these individual channels while helping to make everything work better
mm.
together, I think it could be even so much greater than what it is now. So that's just one example, but there's any number of them. But really, it's about forming touch points with the donors and then using those channels for their specific strengths to try to reinforce the goal, which is ultimately to promote generosity and deliver a better donor experience.
Ooh, okay. So I just think you're giving some really good, like, you're kind of pulling the veil back on this a little bit in a way that I love. So can you list out for me, like when you say omni-channel or multi-channel, can you list out the channels that you're referring to primarily sort of included in that? And I love what you just said, identifying the strengths of each individual channel.
Sure, absolutely. This may be a little bit controversial, but in my opinion, I think direct mail is still the best pillar channel to build a program around because it's the easiest one to add on these additional layers to. You can do digital co-targeting or display co-targeting. You can either get or append sell information to add an SMS component. So direct mail, besides all the other reasons why it's kind of endured as a workhorse of the industry, is a really good pillar to kind of build on these channels of communication. I understand there's a lot of organizations that prefer a digital first approach. That's just my personal opinion. But for me, it's direct mail. Email, of course, still very powerful way to engage donors, even though it's become much more complicated in recent years. I think social media and digital display is probably an underutilized channel for not so much fundraising, but for reinforcing messaging with donors. And we're starting to hear more discussion about the importance of branding, not just for acquiring donors, but once they come onto your file, about constantly reminding them and reinforcing your messaging. I also think SMS text, also very powerful channel for developing relationships with donors. And there's any number of them, but those are kind of the big ones right now, besides your organic channels like social media where you're posting and reaching donors. But in terms of targeted strategy or paid, those are kind of the big ones. But that's what's so great about direct mail, is that as you perfect your direct mail program, it's fairly turnkey then to add on these additional layers to it.
Okay, so you might be challenging an assumption of mine that I've sort of unknowingly had. And so I want to sort of explore this for a second. So one of the things that I was going to ask you originally was, you started off sharing a little bit about you and your commitment to making, it sounds like, really data-informed decisions, and sort of you're interested in looking at that. And one of the things that I've wondered about marketing strategies and sort of how, especially when organizations get caught in that binary way of thinking, is how some types of marketing are much more measurable on multiple kind of layers, right? Versus sometimes how I feel about direct mail, which I'm not a no direct mail person. I'm very much a case by case basis, depending on a lot of different things in terms of how I think about incorporating it. But I've wondered how, if an organization is choosing to use one thing over another, and one thing can track opens and clicks and engagement and conversion so easily, and direct mail maybe could track one of those things really easily, or maybe you're going to tell me ways they can track all the things more easily. I'm just curious, how do you think about this?
No, it's a fantastic question. And I really appreciate that you're drawing the distinction between engagement and conversion. So direct mail, pretty easy at measuring how much revenue it's generating. I mean, we know based on key codes, we could tell how many donors and how much revenue is generated from an individual list. What we don't know is how that direct mail piece is influencing conversions downstream. We have a little bit of an idea because we can look at online traffic that gets generated after the mail piece goes out, and that is an increasing part of giving. It's kind of always been there in the background, but it's definitely picked up steam since the pandemic. But I think it has to be ideally both. So something like direct mail, it's great for making the ask, but direct mail is even more potent, I believe, when you combine it with something like SMS text, where you're not necessarily asking for money, but you're using that as a relationship builder. And that's getting at something you mentioned before, kind of about sometimes these competing interests in the industries between engagement and conversions, where might be holding the industry back a bit, because a lot of channels themselves, they promote the revenue generation. And of course, it makes sense. We want to talk about how we can enhance the bottom line for nonprofits. But in my opinion, something like SMS text, if you can develop a text relationship with someone, a donor, on their phone that mimics what they have with a friend or their family member, to me, that's much more powerful than a one-time donation. And yes, text is very powerful for raising money. But when you combine something like that, that's creating a positive experience and raising engagement with something that can tell stories and reinforce impact and value proposition, as well as direct mail, that is the perfect storm of fundraising today, is when you can take channels that are very good engagement mechanisms and combine them with the channels that are best for closing the ask. And direct mail is just one. I mean, email could easily be put in there as well, but also much more effective when you put on these other components that maybe are not about raising money. But the trick there is testing. All of this is fairly easily testable, where you can look to see, well, what's the impact when you add on digital display to an email campaign or text messaging to a direct mail campaign. But it's also about working with partners that see the vision and are willing to be a part that is maybe helping on the engagement aspect, but isn't focused on the revenue, but with the idea that if we can increase the revenue altogether for the nonprofit, that's a win for everyone. So that's also
Mm.
part of the multi-channel education process, is getting fundraisers from different backgrounds to talk to each other and realize that they have much more to gain by collaborating than they do to lose.
Yeah, wow. There's so much wisdom in what you just said. And I mean, I really, that piece around engagement versus conversion. And I'm sure I'm going to open up a can of worms with like 2 minutes left, but it's so interesting when we think about, I know both you and I are very like strong advocates for like unsiloed marketing and fundraising, truthfully, because as somebody who fundraised in a lot of organizations that did not have a marketer or a marketing department, my job as the fundraiser was the quote unquote marketing, which I have believed was just engagement. Right. So it's like so interesting because we put these kind of like department hats on everything. We're like, oh, the marketing's over here and the fundraising is over here. And it's like, well, actually, it's all about sort of engagement and then the different ways that we express engagement and buy-in and partnership throughout a like actual relationship with someone. So I love that you're talking about that just really transparently. And then to say to folks who are listening, like, if you are only looking for tools that do conversion, that's how we get stuck in transactional ways of fundraising.
Absolutely. And some of this is nonprofits literally breaking down the silos which exist with inside their organizations. But a lot of it is just fundraisers of different backgrounds talking to each other,
Mm.
getting different types of education about other channels, and then meeting people that can help make connections. I would challenge anyone who does regularly invest or spend time reading about education in fundraising, which many of us do, is to look for things outside of your day-to-day specialty and see what you can complement your knowledge with, and who can you find that works in that area that might be able to complement what you do. And I think that's really the first step. And as I've been talking about unsiloed fundraising for quite a few years now, I've realized that kind of that cultural component is the missing link. And sometimes it's as simple as just putting different types of people in the same room and having them talk about their shared experiences and what they could learn from each other. And that's really how we get the ball rolling to getting not just more channels working together to deliver better donor experience, but different types of fundraisers and people in the industry working together to do the same.
Okay, that is such good advice. And that is such good advice. And for folks who are listening, like it could be as simple as Googling, like when you were saying that, I was thinking, okay, so think about the goal that you have with whatever fundraising mechanism you've been primarily tasked to use. And even if you just Google, how did a nonprofit strengthen their, let's say you're the direct mail person, strengthen their direct mail with text message, right? Like just start to play around and find case studies or examples of people like adding on layers into the thing. Because I think to your point, a lot of fundraisers, if like, gosh, there's so much pressure on fundraisers, right? To return, to show results around the area that they've been tasked to show results for. And it can be really hard when you're overwhelmed and you're feeling that pressure to like step back and say like, okay, I want to sort of quote unquote add something else to on my plate. But I think if you can think about it through the frame of like, this strengthens the thing that I am trying to do in a lot of ways, it might be an interesting entry point for people to start to consider that maybe it's not either or.
Absolutely. I'll share a very quick personal example. As a direct mail fundraiser, I've been spending a lot of time educating myself in connected television, because I think connected television, very powerful channel on its own. But to me, the idea of delivering somebody a lean in experience on their television like that, and then following it up with a mail piece, I see a lot of similarities between why both work. And that has to do with the
Mm.
active attention that the person is paying to that medium. So to me, direct mail, connected television, very potent potential combination. Um, and it's getting better every day, but there's a lot of barriers that have to be broken down between the people and companies that work with those channels and getting them in more collaborative direction. But that's just one example, and there's any number of them. The world is interconnected. Donors are everywhere these days. So chances are, no matter what you do, what you specialize in, there's some other channel or technique that can complement it and make what you do more valuable.
Dan, thank you so much for joining me today, for dropping so much wisdom in the short amount of time that we had. I really appreciate it and appreciate you.
Well, I really appreciate you. Thank you so much for having me and for your leadership in the industry and for having me on today. I was happy to share this with your audience. Hope they got value out of it.